Okay, everyone, thanks for joining today. We're going to go ahead and get started. Um, so before we get started with the webinar, just want to give a few housekeeping notes. We are recording and we'll share this recording after the webinar. If you have any questions during the webinar, please drop them in the Q&A and we'll make sure to address them. And also just make sure that you're muted throughout the webinar. You can come off mute and ask questions at certain points throughout the webinar, but just make sure that everybody's on mute during the presentation. And yeah, feel free to drop in the chat your name and where you're from, what you do. So with that, I'm going to hand it off to Anna, who's going to talk a little bit about NREL and what we do.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Anna Garcia, and welcome to the Energy Efficiency and Conservation Block Grant webinar series. I'm a project manager in communities work at the National Renewable Energy Lab, otherwise known as NREL. NREL is a national laboratory of the U.S. Department of Energy. It is one of 17 national laboratories across the U.S. As the name implies, we focus almost exclusively on renewable energy and energy conservation. We provide tools, data, TA platforms, research, training, facilitation, and more. Our TA programs integrate research, support deployment, and increase practical application through decision support for state, local, and tribal governments. Our research spans specific renewable energy technologies and technical analysis, as well as finance, social science, economics, environmental impacts, policy, and planning. We have 3 campuses. We have 2 in Colorado, 1 in Fairbanks, Alaska, and an office in Washington, D.C. You're welcome to visit us and learn from our living laboratory. We do have tours for external people. NREL supports communities applying to access their EECBG formula funds. We're here to provide peer feedback or co-develop your energy efficiency and conservation strategy. Strategy documents are required with your EECBG applications. Our program provides up to 20 hours of free technical assistance to answer your questions on creating or strengthening your community strategy. We're excited about today's workshop on energy planning and EV planning. This workshop on fleet electrification framework and process is part of the Office of State and Community Energy Programs and the National Renewable Energy Lab NREL webinar series designed to assist and inform. It'll be focused on communities participating in the Energy Efficiency and Conservation Block Grant Program. Thank you for attending today, and we hope you enjoy the session.
Awesome. Thanks, Anna. All right. I am going to hand it over to Alex, who's going to talk a little bit about SCEP and give some updates.
All right. Hi, everybody. I'm Alex. I am on the Energy Efficiency Conservation Block Grant Program Technical Assistance team. And I'm here today just to welcome you to the webinar and to share some exciting updates, program reminders for EECBG communities. So want to just take some time, as Anna mentioned, this is part of the EECBG webinar series, so want to make some time to do that up top before we get into the really great presentation we have on deck for you today about EV planning. So let's just jump right in. Can everyone see my screen okay? I just want to double check before I get going.
Looks good.
Alrighty. Okay, wonderful. Okay, so just some EECBG program reminders I want to go over. First and foremost is the EECBG program local government application deadline, which is coming up very soon, April 30th, 2024. We have a whole host of resources available on our EECBG Formula Hub webpage on how to apply, templates for certain application documents that are required, email addresses you can reach out to if you have questions. So encourage you to use that webpage as a resource. The easiest way to find it is to just Google EECBG Formula Hub and it should pop right up. Another deadline coming up is specific to tribes. So the EECBG program tribal application deadline isn't until May 31st, 2025. So it's just the local government deadline that's coming up at the end of this month. Other than those deadlines, we have some other events going on and webinars that you can tune into. First and foremost are the EECBG office hours. We have held office hours in the past every other week. But now, because we know the local government application deadline is coming up so soon, we're ramping up those office hours, and we have them, every few days. So there are upcoming office hours tomorrow on April 19th, on April 24th, and 26th at 2:30 p.m. Eastern. And once I'm done kind of going through these updates, I'll drop some links in the chat for you to, so you can know where to go to take advantage of these resources. But you can sign up to get your questions answered live from DOE staff at those office hours events. So that's really useful. As part of our EECBG Blueprint Cohorts webinar series, which this is a part of, we have another event coming up on April 25th, which is also focused on electric vehicles and charging infrastructure. And we'll be bringing in a lot of guest speakers from local governments who are doing this work on the ground to really hear about best practices and case studies. So encourage you to tune in for that. The theme for May is going to be resilience. So we'll have some webinars focused on resilience. And the theme for June is going to be Justice 40 and community engagement. So stay tuned for more information about events that are happening during that time. Some other opportunities I just wanted to really quickly highlight are the energy savings performance contracting campaign that DOE runs. So this is a technical assistance opportunity that engages local governments, other stakeholders who might want to expand or enhance energy savings performance contracting programs. So for those that are really interested in ESPCs or specifically Blueprint 2B that focuses on ESPCs, we really encourage you to look into that program. There's actually an event, a webinar that they're hosting on May 5th on maximizing municipal energy strategies. So encourage you to attend that as well. Another exciting update is that we've been promoting this Energy Efficiency Finance Foundations training that's happening this summer, and they just released the registration to actually sign up for those events. So I'll drop that in the chat as well. The first webinar is going to be on June 20th, and I believe there's 6 events throughout the summer that are kind of a primer on how public sector facility managers, energy sustainability staff, and other folks at the local level can kind of learn to navigate finance speak and better interact with contractors and finance folk. Last update is there's a Energy Codes conference in Sacramento, California, starting on May 6th. So if you're really interested in codes, if you're using Blueprint 2D, which focuses on codes or building performance standards, this might be of interest to you. So I just wanted to highlight that as well here. I also want to take the time to highlight some other DOE funding and technical assistance opportunities. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail around these, but just wanted to highlight that we have a ton of open opportunities right now, ranging from direct funding to technical assistance, focused on local governments, focused on tribes and community-based organizations. And you can learn about all of these that I've listed here, as well as on this slide here at our State and Local Solution Center, which I've linked at the bottom of the screen here. And there's a public funding tracker on that webpage that has the information about all of these different opportunities that you can click into and learn more about how you might fit into these programs and apply. So I just wanted to take a moment to highlight that and show you, there's a ton going on right now. So make sure to stay on top of those deadlines. And hopefully you can start implementing more clean energy work in your communities through these programs as well. Lastly, I just wanted to highlight, because we are coming up very, very close to the local government deadline for EECBG, this is kind of your various lifelines, right, of support that you can turn to if you have a question about your application, if you are looking for technical assistance around your application.
I think, Alex, we're not seeing your slides change for some reason. We're just seeing that first one.
Oh, that's not ideal. Sorry about that. Let me come out.
Okay, we see that. We see that
We're
now.
seeing this now?
Mhm.
Okay, wonderful. This is, as I was mentioning, kind of like your lifeline of different areas you can turn to for support when it comes to EECBG and getting your application submitted or asking for technical assistance. So, please do reach out to us if you have questions about your application leading up to the deadline. We're getting a high influx of questions, so we'll do our best to get back to you as soon as we can. but don't be shy. Don't be afraid to reach out. And Anna also mentioned how you can get support through NREL and this kind of purple bucket on the right-hand side of the screen. So wanted to highlight that as well. You can reach out to NREL for support around your energy efficiency conservation strategy. I'll be on this webinar for the whole duration of the time. So if there are any EECBG questions that pop up in the chat, I'd be more than happy to answer them. And I'll turn it back to Julia. And thanks for attending. And hope this is a great and informative webinar for you all.
Thanks, Alex. All right, so we're going to give Cabell just a second to get his slides up and running. And while he does, I'm going to go ahead and introduce him. So Cabell Hodge is an analysis of vehicle and infrastructure deployment team leader at NREL. Cabell led NREL's support for federal fleet electrification for 7 years, including the development of a tool suite for fleet electrification. He recently transitioned to a role leading the analysis of vehicle and infrastructure deployment group, which includes national and international fleet electrification support, charging technology validation and reliability assessments, analytical tool development, and energy justice analysis. Cabell is published on fleet electrification, vehicle grid integration, telematics, vehicle cybersecurity, and related topics. He previously worked as a transportation policy advisor for the state of Colorado and as a financial analyst for Promontory Group. He has a JD, Graduate Energy Certificate, and a BA in Economics. So thank you, Cabell, so much for being here. And I'm going to drop a guide to this webinar in the chat that you can use to follow along. Oh, I think we lost Cabell. Anna, do you want to get the slides
Yeah.
up and running again? And then we'll wait for Cabell to rejoin. Sorry, everyone, just give us a moment to work through these technical difficulties. I'm going to drop the webinar guide into the chat that you can take a look at in the meantime. Just let us know if you have any troubles accessing that.
Hi, everyone. I'm Odette with DOE here. I'll just jump in. If we can take questions too, if there's if anybody has burning questions that you want us to address during this webinar, you could add them to the chat. If you have questions about any of the things that Alex went over, you can ask those now. Feel free to chime in with it, whatever you'd like to hear about from the DOE or the NREL team. And I'll just say the webinar guide is a very useful tool. So please open it, take a look. If you have questions about it, now's the time to ask.
And I think
There
we
he
have
is.
Cabell back in. Cabell, are you with us?
Hey, I'm back. Sorry about that. Julia, as I suspected when I tried to share the screen, Zoom kicked me out. But it looks like Anna is sharing the slides, so I think we're good to go.
Yeah, thank you so much, Anna.
All right, yeah, thanks, Anna. I appreciate that. All right. So I'm sure you gave a great introduction and everything. In case it wasn't covered, I'm Cabell Hodge, work at NREL. Primarily was working as the federal fleet project leader, now leading a group focused on analysis of vehicle and infrastructure deployment. And we've been in the process through the federal fleet program of developing a number of processes and tools for electrifying the federal fleet that apply really well to state and local governments. And I think most of the folks, based on the introductions earlier, what people were putting into the chat, are representing their local communities. So, and if you can go to the next slide, this is probably where you want to end up with your fleet electrification process. You want to know how many charging stations you're going to need and where. As part of that, you'll have to understand how many vehicles you're planning on electrifying. And ideally, you want a site plan, ultimately a site design, and something like this, where you've got an idea of how much this is going to cost you. In order to get there, and you can see on the next slide, we have an entire process built out. So these are just the first 7 steps of that process, where we're looking on a step-by-step basis at the sort of planning process. And I'm going to focus pretty heavily on this part of the presentation. And I'm going to go through each of these steps one by one, but it starts with things as simple as identifying and coordinating your team, and gets into more complex things like identifying zero emission vehicle or ZEV opportunities, and then identifying electric vehicle supply equipment or EVSE opportunities. There is a link here. If somebody could drop it into the chat, that'd be great. It's that energy.gov. /fem/federal-fleet-zev-ready-center. And on the next slide, you'll see there are also phases related to design and execution. So the design phase is really about getting the electric vehicle supply equipment installed and everything that goes along with that, as well as identifying charging stations that are offsite, and so that you're maybe less responsible for. And then the ZEV active phase is really once you already have gone through all the planning, all the design, you're actually acquiring the vehicles, and then installing and activating the EVSE, and then supporting the drivers ultimately and using the ZEVs and the EVSE. Next slide, please. Accompanying this whole ZEV Ready Center, we also have a tracker. And so the tracker is going to basically identify where you are at in the process. And so it's something where you can just kind of, it's a PDF, you just go through, indicate whether you're complete, in progress, or not started on any particular action, which falls as a sort of subset within the steps. And then once you end up toggling them all to complete, then you're going to find at the top of the tracker things like team ready, vehicle ready, commitment ready, charging ready will ultimately toggle to complete as well. Next slide, please. So my first question for you guys is trying to understand what phase you are at in the process of fleet electrification or planning for EV infrastructure, whether that's planning, design, or execution. So you should be able to answer with one of the radio buttons right here. Click submit, and we'll give you guys a minute to do that, and then we're gonna pull things up. The other thing I'll mention is that I am gonna be tracking the chat as we go through here for questions. So the first question was about alternate links for the guide. It looks like Alex dropped in an alternate link there. Dan, let us know if that fixes your problem. And it looks like Julia actually attached the document. So hopefully you're in good shape there. Another question was about whether we are planning on discussing topics related to hydrogen or fuel cells. Not really in this webinar. This really is focused on fleet electrification. So let's see what answers we got. All right. Most of you guys are in the planning phase. I've got a couple people in the design and execution phase, and it's possible to be in multiple phases at any given time. But that's good. So for those of you guys who are in the planning phase, really want to pay attention to the next 10 slides or so, because that's where we're going to focus on that. If you want to drop that and go to the next slide, that would be great. All right. So the first step in the process is really about building a team. And we built this with the federal fleet in mind, where often the fleet managers are responsible for hundreds, if not 1,000 vehicles. And there's additional staff on site, right? Like the facility and infrastructure manager, facility energy manager, and of course the vehicle operators. Now, I know with a lot of local communities, fleet manager is the facility manager, is the energy manager. And in a case like that, congratulations, you've assembled a team. And I think you figured out pretty quickly who's going to be the ZEV champion, who's going to be necessary to make this work. But it's important to look around your organization and figure out who's responsible for what. And ultimately, there does need to be one person who takes charge of the project. It's the only way really to make sure anything gets done. And you can use that ZEV-Ready tracker, the PDF that I showed you before, in order to track where everybody is at with this. Also had Julia's help and Andrew's help putting together a bit of a webinar guide. So that can be found in the chat. And that webinar guide follows along the same sort of logic as this ZEV-Ready planning tracker. Next slide, please. So we've got another question here. And what role do you play in your organization regarding fleet electrification? ZEV champion, fleet manager, facility infrastructure manager, facility energy manager, sustainability manager, which looks like it didn't make it into the poll question, or other. So I guess if you're a sustainability manager, you can pop it under there if it doesn't fit as well in one of these other locations. Now, of course, there's a possibility that you are going to fall under two of the categories here. And that's okay. Wouldn't mind seeing that in the chat, just in terms of if you're all of the above or something along those lines. Let's see if there's anything more going on in the chat here. Looking for a guide to help scope and budget a resilient DCFC with an energy storage system and generator hookup for charging during an emergency with grid outage. Having trouble scoping that. I don't know that there's necessarily a guidebook out for that. However, we're working on a project that involves that sort of setup, and it's more of an all-in-one kind of situation with a battery buffer DC fast charger. So that might be a consideration. I would say, Christian, if you have specific, if you want to reach out separately on that, I'd be happy to chat about it, but I think might end up derailing a little bit from here. Do we have any answers from the poll? A lot of others. Interesting. Could we get something in the chat going where we see what all those sort of other positions are? I guess we do have some sort of an idea from earlier, which it looks like since I got kicked out of Zoom, I lost that earlier bit. But I think what I remember is we had a bunch of grant coordinators. Oh, we got a sustainability coordinator, climate action. This is great. So a lot of people on the sustainability, strategic initiative, planning management kind of side of things. So in that case, a lot of our ZEV champions actually fit into more of this bucket than into the fleet manager bucket. So it is possible that you could still fall underneath that other thing. But you might really have to reach out to a fleet manager. Most commonly, it's the fleet manager who ends up being the ZEV champion for these projects. Not always the case, of course. Next slide, please. All right, so step 2, reviewing training materials. Got a link down here below, and it is also in that training guide with some electric vehicle training. We've got a few different trainings out there right now. We're working on a few others. So the ones that we have right now, one is an overview of the EV technology. Each of these videos is about 10 minutes long. And the EV technology gets into things like what's a battery electric vehicle? Well, that means that it's only running on electricity, whereas a plug-in hybrid electric vehicle is going to be able to fuel up with electricity or gasoline. And then a conventional hybrid vehicle is only going to fuel up with gasoline, but uses regenerative braking and a small battery to assist with that. Then there are EV financial considerations. So some things to think about with regards to the transition, including some benefits and some costs that are going to be associated with it. we've got one training that is specifically focused on EVSE, electric vehicle supply equipment infrastructure. So everything that really goes into installing a charging station. And the fourth training is called driving electric vehicles. I wish it were a little bit more focused on some of the challenges and differences of driving an electric vehicle. We're actually working on a new training that's going to be even better on there. That's going to be at that same location. You probably won't see that pop up for a couple months though. Okay, yeah, interesting stuff in the chat here. Also considering the floodplain and the environmental resiliency planning. Those are definitely going to be factors when you're looking at charging stations. So where are those videos and trainings found? Actually, it's easy enough for me to just, since I'm not presenting, to just pull that link directly into here. I should mention that we've got a bunch of longer webinars in addition to those kind of brief videos. Those longer webinars are going to be more like an hour, 2 hours, and we actually have one that's series. It's called EV Champion Training. That ends up adding up to about 6 hours of training if you really want to get fully up to speed on everything that you need to do for planning and installing charging stations. Next slide, please. So steps 3 and 4 talk about requirements and policies. And these ones, in the federal context, I thought they wouldn't be all that helpful really to spend a lot of time on with you guys. I did want to point out the federal government has an executive order where 100% of light duty acquisitions by 2027 need to be zero emission vehicles. Now, that's pertinent because you might have the same sort of requirements within your local government, but that's just an example. Whereas the agency policies and really step 4 is those things are kind of applicable across the board. You know, things like installing chargers before electric vehicles arrive. Seems obvious, doesn't always happen that way. There have been a number of cases where EVs arrive and they have nowhere to plug, and they're just sitting there for a couple of months until someone can get a charging station installed. Then planning ZEV acquisitions for the next 3 years. Maybe you want to plan them for the next 5 years. Maybe you want to plan them until you are fully electrified. But you don't just want to plan really 1 year at a time, which can be the default process, just because it has been the process so long with ICE vehicles, where we're not really thinking about the infrastructure concerns and the timelines associated with getting charging stations installed. Allowing privately owned vehicles to use fleet chargers where there's no conflict with site mission. Sometimes there are like hours that a fleet will allow the privately owned vehicles to use those chargers. For example, maybe you can use them from 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. as long as you're gone by the time the fleet vehicles return for the end of the day. Installing additional EVSE whenever new construction projects are undertaken. Obviously, that's going to be the cheapest time to install EVSE in the context of the overall project is when the ground's already disturbed, when you're already installing new transformers and service panels. Next slide, please. So we've got another poll question here. And the question is whether there are federal agencies located in your vicinity. And the reason I ask this is because there are opportunities to partner with these federal agencies in a lot of cases. And there are even some specific funding authorities where you can bring somebody under contract as part of a federal local government partnership. So curious, you know, whether you have them, but never talk to them. You do have the federal agencies, you coordinate closely with them. There really aren't any federal buildings around, or we're talking to a federal agency right now. So curious what we'll see here. Oh yeah, that's a great playbook, Alex, that you dropped into the chat, the Joint Office of Energy and Transportation infrastructure playbook. As you note, it really is focused on public EV charging. A lot of these resources in this webinar today are more focused on fleet charging stuff. However, we've got some of the same people working on both of those things. So there is quite a bit of overlap in terms of ideas and ultimately the products themselves. So let's see what we heard from the crowd. All right. So I guess good to know that you guys aren't federal agencies and we're just replicating some of the other things, except for it looks like one person. Hi. Don't know if we've connected before. The yes, but we never talked to them, and yes, we talked to them, and no, not as far as I know, more or less equally split. So if you do have agencies, do talk to them. There really might be opportunities, you know, in terms of splitting a contractor, for example, in terms of leveraging their contracts, or maybe they could benefit from you guys and leverage yours. But one way or another, you know, a lot of these companies that are willing to go out, plan, design, install charging stations are going to offer you better rates if there is more business associated with them. So definitely a good opportunity, and you can always just kind of search, poke around in terms of finding federal agencies in Google Maps or something like that. But if you don't have them, that's okay. We can just move on to the next part. All right. So step 5 is identifying zero emission vehicle opportunities. We have a tool for this, and it's not the only tool. I'll talk about another option here, but this one, which we call ZPAC, is kind of cool because it uses gasoline fueling transactions and machine learning methodology to identify ZEF opportunities. And that's nice because a lot of the other tools that are out there use telematics data, which is valuable and is encouraged, in fact, but not everyone is collecting telematics data. And so if you don't have the telematics, which are going to tell you the GPS location of your vehicle at any given point in time, how much fuel consumed on any given trip, anything like that, you very likely are tracking your gasoline fueling transactions. And so that could come through a fleet card like Right Express or Voyager, could come through another system. But if you have that information, we can actually interpolate what's going on with those vehicles and predict which ones are going to have greater range concerns versus which ones are not. Then the users are, and what we do with the ZPAC tool is provide that information, which I'll show you on the next slide. And then the users select which vehicles they would like to replace with ZEVs. Then it will group the vehicles by lot to support EVSE planning. So I'll show you a little bit more of that on the next slide here. This is what the interface looks like. It's an Excel tool, and it's totally open, so you can manipulate it however you want and adjust it as you see fit. But we start with whether there is an available replacement. And we've got BEVs, or battery electric vehicles, in a separate grouping on the spreadsheet, as opposed to PHEVs, the plug-in hybrid electric vehicles. Those are going to show up somewhere different. And for BEVs, we're looking at whether there's a replacement available. Specifically, we look at this with regard to the GSA schedule. So that's what's going to come pre-populated in there. It's one of those things that you could replace with a different sort of mapping of your existing vehicles compared to what's available for you to purchase. Then that modeling, the machine learning modeling, comes in with the BEV range concerns. Basically, we can identify with pretty good certainty whether minimal public charging is likely, so less than 5 fast charging sessions away from home over the course of a year, whether 6 to 10 or some public charging is likely, whether you're going to see frequent public charging, so 11 to 15 getting into the once a month or more, or very frequent public charging is likely 16 plus. And at that point, you know, the reason we actually use those cutoffs is because if you have minimal or some public charging likely, you're probably not spending much more, if any more time at a fast charger over the course of a year than you would have otherwise spent at a public fueling station. Once you get into frequent, that probably does mean that the time is adding up and ultimately could take away a little bit from your operations. You can overwrite that by putting in your own reported BEV range concerns. And in fact, if you don't have the gasoline fueling transactions, you can sort of come up with that information on your own, and the spreadsheet will just kind of work the rest of the way through. Then there are the greenhouse gas emission reduction potentials, which is primarily based on how much fuel you use. All of that goes into whether your quality of an EV candidate is great, good, mediocre, challenging, or there's just no option available within that BEV. The user ultimately identifies which vehicles they are going to replace with a BEV, PHEV, or eliminate. The users in this tool also identify the parking location of their vehicles, and then the tool will group those vehicles into parking locations as well as by the year of acquisition. So you'll be able to look at things that way. So if you go to the next slide here, you're going to see what that EVSE side looks like. And so this is just another tab within the tool. And basically, this gray information is going to be populated from the other tabs. There's a lot more information. I couldn't really show it well on this slide, but it will give you a recommended number of additional level 2 charging ports for your BEVs, and then a recommended number of level 1 charging ports for your PHEVs, but you'll actually identify that planned number. So the tool will make recommendations and you will confirm or deny that. Then if you go to this next slide, you can see how that looks over time. So the completely filled bars on this chart are existing charging stations and existing ZEVs. Green's existing level 2, blue's existing ZEVs, and then the hashed ones are the planned additions by year. And so you can go ahead and change that and see if it makes sense. One thing you want to think about is, do you really want to be installing level 2 chargers every single year like you see in this example, right? Do you really want to install some in 2023, some in 2024, some in 2025? Or if you're going at a parking lot, do you just want to go right to your 2026 levels and at least you're a couple years ahead of the game? If you would like a copy of this tool, we can give you an anonymized copy of the tool so you can sort of see how to fill it in yourself if you email mark.singer@nrel.gov. We're working on, well, we developed an import template, but for fueling transactions, but we couldn't quite get the data in a format that worked for us. So we're working with the state and alternative fuel provider program, as well as the Clean Cities program, which offers support for local communities to see if we can create something that's really going to work in your hands. So be really interested in feedback from you guys on this tool. Next slide, please. Another option that you have is using your telematics data. And so that's, of course, only if you have telematics. I'm not seeing the slide move. I don't know if that's me, if I'm having issues again. Oh, sorry, we're at a poll question. Thanks, Anna. Do you have plans to install EV chargers? A is yes in the next 6 months, so very near future. B, yes in the next year. C, someday. D, no. E, we have all the chargers we'll ever need. So, okay, cool. I haven't seen this other guidebook that you're recommending, Christian, but I'm going to click on that myself, actually, while you guys are filling out this poll question. And so it looks like that one's from the California Governor's Office of Business and Economic Development, 2023. We'll definitely check this out. Yeah, really interesting. Okay, this one looks like it's focused on charging stations and permitting in particular. So we actually do have some folks who work in the sort of permitting side of things. Has anyone ever checked E? I don't know that anyone ever has. Yeah, I don't know. Maybe at NREL, we installed about 120 charging stations in our parking garage right before COVID for privately owned vehicles. And then people stopped coming into work as much. So even as our EV penetration has gone up to like 600 vehicles, not enough people come in to use them. And so our fleets are able to use them. We only have 45 vehicles in our fleet. So it's possible. I can at least tell you that we don't have plans right now to install more chargers. So yeah, that's I think the trick is to install way more chargers than you'll ever need. Is the only way to actually say that you have all of them. All right, let's see the responses. No answers on E. Yes, in the next 6 months. Yes, in the next year. Wow, that is the vast majority of the answers, and yes, someday. So it sounds like just about everybody is in the right webinar. So that is great. And we'll get into it a little bit more with the slides that are coming up, but we've got some resources to help you guys out. So starting with ZPAC, but moving into some of these other ones as well. All right, so this is the tool that I started talking about. This tool we call EVI Fleet, and it works sort of similarly to ZPAC. Like the overall idea is the same, but because we have the Telemax trip data, we can generate much more precise results than ZPAC. So it basically is this tool just provides you recommendations, right? Whereas ZPAC has you overwriting information, entering your own information, dealing with a pretty large Excel spreadsheet with some complexities to it. This is more like, if you can provide us a file, and we've been working with GeoTab in particular in terms of partnership on this. So we know that they can provide the file. I suspect just about any Telemax provider can. We can give you how much energy, basically how many EVs will make sense for you, or you can just overwrite that and say, no, we're going fully electric. That's our answer, right? Ultimately, what we're trying to provide you is how many charging ports of what power level you need and where. So this gets into some of those level 1, which is a 2 kilowatt charger, level 2, which is 7, or a 50 kilowatt DC charger or 150 kilowatt DC charger. And so we can tell you basically how many of each you need, as well as your average charging demand by charging window in an unmanaged kind of situation, and what that's going to mean in terms of a peak fleet charging demand, which incidentally is the information that you need to figure out what sort of transformer and service panel you need to provide the power and the overcurrent protection to your chargers. So requires that Telemax trip data. If you have it, feel free to send it to us. This is one where if you can give us the data in the format we need, we could just kind of spit something out back to you. It's just Python script, and so we can run it. Ultimately, what we want to do is we'll probably just publish an article and the script itself so that anybody can use it, any consultants can use it. But we'd like to have a little bit of a user interface behind that. So if you're not familiar with coding in Python, there's no real barrier to entry. That's ultimately the idea. Next slide, please. So we're getting into the design phase here, which is which charger is right for you. And there are 4 steps in the design phase. Again, you want to come back to your team, engaging with the key electrification stakeholders at the site. At this point, now that you know how many charging stations you want and where, you really want to coordinate with your local utility service. Step 10, you'll complete a site assessment and design EVSE. And the reason 9 is before 10 is because sometimes your local utility service will complete a site assessment for you for free, design your charging station, take care of pretty much everything for you. That's not always the case. That's not even the case in the majority of situations. However, at the very least, they're going to be able to tell you whether they can provide you with the electricity that you need to operate your charging stations. And then step 11 is a bit of a sidebar where you're identifying charging stations at non-agency locations, so away from home. The next slide is going to show you what EV Viewfinder looks like. It's another Excel tool. However, this one's really simple. This one, and I'm not seeing the slide move. There it is. This one, you just pop in a zip code. So where you are located. So say you are located in Arkansas, that's your zip code 72863. You're going to pop that in, and it is going to provide you the utilities that are active in your zip code. Most of the time, it's just one. However, I wanted to provide an example where there are actually 3 different utilities servicing this territory. And probably they all have a little chunk of 72863. And so you'll be able to find out that Entergy Arkansas has EVSE funding incentives. And those incentives are available for the government, for commercial and residential folks. We will flag in here whether there are known federal EVSE incentives. We also identify the contact that was provided to us by the utility who wants to be the person that interfaces with you on installing EVSE. So that's great. The name and the email address can be found in the tool for those people. Not always going to be the case. For example, we didn't get all of the responses from the co-ops. There are well over 1,000 co-ops, rural electric co-ops servicing different areas in the United States. And the NRECA wasn't really able to get us all of those contacts together. However, we've got a pretty good list for the IOUs and a decent list for the municipal utilities as well. Next slide, please. This shows you the incentives that are available. And this is a different grouping, but just wanted to sort of show you what this could look like. I know it's small. Hopefully you can actually just download the tool itself and look at it for your own purposes. But there are different programs. Some of those, what we call incentives, are really technical assistance programs where people will work with you. Sometimes they're grant programs. Sometimes they're only going to be available to residential customers. However, not uncommon that there are government incentives available through utilities. So they actually can fund you and you will be eligible in some of these cases. So check out the tool and definitely coordinate, even if there isn't money, with your local utility to let them know the chargers are coming. If you're going to need new service, this is imperative. However, even if you're bumping up against your existing service, it's good for them to know that, like, hey, this is our plan. This is going to get us through 2025, 2026 with our charging stations. But down the road, we're going through this greater fleet electrification process. And so by 2027, we're really going to need a new feeder run out. And that's typically the timeline that utilities are on. I mean, they prefer to plan 3 to 5 years out in advance. So a lot of times it's hard to get new service within a year from a given utility. Next slide, please. All right. So another poll question. Have you engaged with your local utility on EV charging? Got A, we've completed a project with them. B, spoke to them at a high level. C, we're in detailed discussions. D, not yet. And here, I would love it if you guys could use the chat, and especially if you've completed a project, spoken with them at a high level, or are in detailed discussions. Would love to hear examples of what that looks like. So I'll give you guys an extra minute to sort through that. All right, so we got one user saying they installed 2 level 2 public charging stations at the City Hall facility. In that case, did you have to work with the utility? Okay, looks like somebody else notified their utility about the installation of charging stations, but they did not assist. We got a power assessment around the island for us to understand where 3-phase power was available for siting level 3 chargers. A lot of times that's an area they specifically want to be involved in, those level 3 or DC fast chargers, because those are higher power loads, and because it's a 480 volt system. So glad to hear that somebody's got a really close relationship with their municipally owned utility right next door to the fleet facility. Partnering with educational webinars, yeah, that's great. Oh, okay, and in response back, collaborating on design and installation. That's awesome, and they provide you with an incentive. That's about as good as you could possibly hope for. We've got some other rebates coming through on the charging stations for a library, cover the majority of the project. That's awesome. Utility asking for the fleet telemax information exchange for an EV plan. Interesting. Yeah, we've actually been engaged in similar things where we basically traded our services for data that can help us in developing other tools or working on other projects. Cool. These are some really good examples. And yeah, it's an interesting point. Maybe just before we finish with this, some of the rebate programs are going to come and go. So they might not stick around forever. Important to look at the timelines for them. And a lot of them are subject to the whims of the Public Utilities Commission. So there can be, you know, a bit of a process there. Some are available for a pilot period of time. Tough to say for sure. Currently in the process of installing another couple and working closely with National Grid. National Grid actually has a bunch of incentives available and a bunch of consultants that they've hired, including some that work with NREL. All right, let's see the results of these poll questions. I think we're getting a lot of yeses. Interestingly split. Okay. So we did get, you know, it looks like 71% said yes to some extent or another, 29% said not yet. I mean, and maybe that makes sense. That could be in keeping if you don't have any sort of plans or know exactly what you're doing, maybe you're not quite there yet. But great to know that 27% of you guys completed a project with them. And great to hear that the other, you know, another half of you guys are already talking to your utilities. So bravo. Glad to hear it. Next slide, please. All right, so we have this tool, and I actually showed an image of it in the very first slide, one of the outputs. It's called EVI Locate, or the Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Locally Optimized Charging Assessment Tool and Estimator. And yes, I regret naming it something so convoluted. It's an EVSE's site planning and cost estimation tool. This tool walks you through on a step-by-step basis what questions really to ask as you're going through the charging station installation process. And it's really neat because you don't need any technical expertise to answer any of the initial questions, and you can sort of work your way all the way through the assessment without even having all the information you need. Then you can come back and fill in some of that. But it even asks you questions like about your transformer load that maybe you don't have on hand, but that you will need to answer if you are considering tapping an existing transformer and installing EVSE off of that. The reason I didn't spend a ton of time in this webinar on this tool is that right now it's only available to the federal government. So if you are a federal fleet, you can log in and use it now, but it's not going to be available to the public until the end of 2024. I say the end of 2024, we're targeting September 2024, but there are typically some holdups with getting through cybersecurity, and perhaps because we're replicating some of the same sorts of code, I could see us getting delayed and pushed back a couple of months from when we have the tool completely built and ready to go to when we're actually ready to deploy it live and make it fully available for you guys. So if you've got any questions about that one in particular, or you just want to be on the distribution list for when it does go live, you can email evi-locate@nrel.gov. So that's an email address that I and a couple of my colleagues have access to, and we can just put you on the list for distribution for that. And as you can see in this waterfall graph, the cost estimates are very detailed, and they're based on a lot of research. So we pulled in information from RS Means, from GSA, and from, I think we're up to about 3,500 invoices from grant programs primarily, showing what the actual costs were associated with the charging stations and where they fit into each of these buckets. And so we've got a pretty good idea of how much the charging stations are going to cost and when. There's always going to be a bit of a gap there. And basically how we're accounting for that uncertainty now is with this contingency factor. So that 10,700, if you can read that little tiny writing there, that is basically means we would expect the project to cost something like 75,000, but it could go up to 85. Next slide, please. Identifying EVSE at non-agency locations. Luckily, this tool is widely available, has been for years, very much dialed. The alternative fuel data center station locator. There are other options you can use like PlugShare. However, this tool is great for a couple of reasons. One, it includes private stations. And so you can go into the advanced filters and identify that. Two, it's verified on a monthly basis. We get, in a lot of cases, on a daily basis, we get daily API fed data from all of the major charging service providers, like Electrify America, EVgo, ChargePoint. And then we have a team actually that goes and validates the other one. So, PlugShare is cool in that it is crowdsourced, but there's a little bit more of a team behind the AFDC station locator. So do recommend it, is helpful. I mean, having an EV, tell you I have a few apps for this, but this is my favorite. Next slide, please. So the ZEV active phase, didn't spend a lot of time on this, partly because I think a lot of the planning and design is the hard part. Actually going out and buying the EVs and the EVSE, once you have the money and the plan in place, it's more contingent on your own sort of bureaucratic purchasing processes than anything else. So I don't want to say that it's easy, because it might not be. It might be an issue, but it's not necessarily something that we can provide you with like a ton of information on. So we do have pages on each of these that talk about them in the federal context. I'm not sure it's as applicable for you as some of this other content is, because we're talking about like GSA procurement authority and some other options like energy service performance contracts, which maybe you can take advantage of as well. But there are specific requirements to do that in the federal government. Step 14, installing and activating the EVSE. It's just a picture at NREL of some of the conduit, some of the tubing that's coming up to the charging stations that are now installed, and just so you can sort of see what those trenches look like and what some of that work looks like when you're installing a bank of charging stations. Another cool thing that's in there, I just want to point out, so supporting drivers in using the ZEVs and EVSE. That driver training, or especially the new one that we're planning on creating, should be really helpful so people understand what they're getting into. Talked about probably going to put together like a one-pager as well on that. There are some other resources online that have one-pagers, which is actually why we haven't done it incidentally yet. However, there's been a little bit of a push just to have our own one for the federal government. So we'll put out something there that I'm sure will look nice. Also just wanted to point out, a lot of people concentrate on the operational costs of EVs with regards to fueling costs. However, the maintenance costs are really significant as well. And that's actually what that table is showing you below. Should have maybe highlighted that a little bit better, but both Consumer Reports and Oregon National Laboratory found similar types of savings from a battery electric vehicle or a plug-in electric vehicle compared to an internal combustion engine vehicle. So especially on the BEV side, we see 40 to 50% savings in terms of maintenance year over year over the lifetime of those vehicles. Interestingly, Consumer Reports, which was based on real data seen in the field, showed that the plug-in hybrid electric vehicles had significant savings as well. The Argonne report, which was more of a sort of ground-up study, didn't show as much in terms of savings from the plug-in hybrid electric vehicles. I'm sort of inclined to go with the Consumer Reports one just because because it was based on a survey of EV drivers and how much they paid and tracking some of that information. However, you can sort of dig into those yourself and see whether it is in fact true in your particular case, whether a plug-in hybrid is going to have the sort of maintenance savings you'd be hoping to see. Next slide, please. So, got a case study that I wanted to provide you guys for a bit of discussion. And Julia and Anna, I'm not sure exactly how we can do this, whether we can fully unmute people or if they have to participate through the chat. So if you want to just let me know maybe through the chat while I'm going through this case study, that'd be really helpful. And this is an exercise that I went through recently at a presentation. I thought it went pretty well. And so I tried to tweak it for this particular audience. Basically, I'm trying to get some information from you guys. Looks like a lot of you all have been through the process and understand what goes into it. And so I think there's an opportunity for us to share lessons learned, right? It's not all about this ZEB-Ready framework. That's not really going to have all of your answers in the end. We do whatever we can, but we even got that information originally a lot of times from talking to people who are in the field and living this, as well as our own experience working on projects. So this is the case study. You've got 20 facility pickup trucks, 7 shuttle buses, 6 minivans or passenger vans, 4 administrative sedans, 3 law enforcement patrol vehicles, and 5 different parking locations. So these vehicles are all spread about. Now, you're a university, and so your mission is mostly university maintenance. Obviously, those patrol vehicles are probably out to make sure everybody is staying safe. And then you've got some student transport. So that's what those minivans, shuttle buses, and passenger vans are all about. They're about getting students from one part of the campus to another. In terms of data, 30 of these vehicles have telematics. I must have mixed it, but so that means I think that means that another 10 only have fueling data. Yeah, that checks out. All right, so another 10 only have fueling data, and so that means all 40 of them have the fueling data, and the fuel cards are assigned to individual vehicles. So we've got some questions for the audience, and Anna did clarify that you can just come off mute if you have an answer to share. So feel free to do that. If we run into any sort of chaos with that, I guess I will sort it out on the fly here. Where do you start? So that's the first question for y'all. Is there a hand raise option, Anna?
Yes, yeah, there's a hand raise option
Okay.
on the bottom.
Okay.
I have to jump to another meeting. I'm sorry. So Julia is sharing her screen now.
Oh, okay, perfect. All right, well, thanks.
Of course.
So guys, feel free to raise your hand and let me see if I can see that.
Looks like we have a hand raised from Robin.
Perfect. Let's hear it from you.
Hi, I know that for Lake County, we recently got a new fleet management system that was able to analyze all of our vehicles for their electrification capabilities. So I would what I start is analyzing the existing telematics and seeing if it's possible to extend that system across the entire fleet to have more data to work with.
Yeah, very cool. How many of your vehicles do you have in there? Or like what percentage of your fleet, maybe, give or take?
We have over 500 vehicles because we're a county government.
Mhm.
And so we're divided up. The vast majority of them are light vehicles, but even our like salting trucks are like in the system.
Very cool. Yeah, I mean, data is a great place to start. And if you've got the telematics data, it definitely does make it easier. Some of the telematics providers, and Robin, I don't know if this is your case, but provide tools so that you can look at, which of your vehicles maybe makes sense to electrify or where you need charging stations.
Right.
Yeah. Right. Do we have any other brave volunteers?
Can I talk?
Please.
When we started switching ours over, talking to the end user, what they use them for. We're in the Midwest, so as far as the pickup truck go, every single one of ours is outfitted with a plow, and right now there's no electric trucks that you can put a plow on. So that took them off the list. As far as our admins, I can pretty much put any single one of my admin people in them because we're 4.5 square miles. So I've got about, let's say 10% of my fleet now. I'm only 150. I don't have a big county one. So about 10% of my fleet is EV now. We're on the process of waiting for more larger vehicles to come out. Our plow trucks obviously can't do it. Anything that's emergency, it's got to run 24/7 until we can recharge at the same rate we can refuel. Those are still out of the box. But talking to the end users, what they use, what they have to carry is a big one with us. Some of my engineering, I needed to get, I had to look into EV pickups just because majority of mine are Leafs and some of their measuring equipment wouldn't fit in them. And a 6'8" person that's mostly legs will not fit in a Leaf. I can tell you that.
Yeah. Fair enough. I stick my brother in there a lot, but he's only 6'3", so. Okay, yeah, very interesting. Okay, so yeah, I mean, you gotta look at what vehicles are available in the market, right? The market is not completely mature. I mean, it's getting very mature in the light duty space. I think about 10% of sales last year in the light duty were EVs, and there are getting to be more and more pickup trucks. I don't know if you saw like the Silverado's coming out with the 400-mile range. I mean, it's going to be really expensive, but there are more and more options there. But medium and heavy duty space is quite a bit less mature, and a lot of those vehicles have a even higher incremental price than what you see kind of in the light duty area. So yeah, thanks. Great input. All right. So those were some of those. How do you start and why? How would you decide which vehicles to electrify? How about this one? How do you plan your charging infrastructure?
Can I talk again?
That would be great. I would love it if somebody would talk.
I don't want to be the only one. I don't want to be the only one, but I mean,
yeah, no, it's fair. I mean, yes, I would love for other people to participate as well, but I appreciate it.
Obviously it's where they're housed. With us, we have two main locations, our village hall. That's where the majority of my admin vehicles are, my animal control, which we got a van for, works out great. And then we have our public works building, which is what I work out of. And we are band-aiding right now. We're just adding a level 2 here, a level 2 there, a level 2 there, until the bigger trucks come up. And then we'll have a major plan on, are we planning for 800-volt charging, 400-volt charging? What is the new technology going to require as far as amperage for fast charging? And then we'll have, it's a newer building, so as far as we have juice, it's just, I can plan piping, but I don't really want to put in the technology until we know what vehicles we're going to be putting there.
Yeah, that makes sense.
It's a whole lot of waiting for what is going to be out.
Right, right. Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. I've seen one thing in the federal fleet with regards to that, where in some cases, folks are installing just the fastest, biggest chargers that they can get, thinking, it's sort of future planning, but generally we can look at now how much electricity the vehicles are going to need over a given period of time, and like how long they're going to be sitting, right? Because that's unlikely to change too much. And so you've got 10 hours, and you only need 200 kilowatt hours, then 20 kilowatt charger, I mean, maybe go a little bit bigger, right, to account for it, but that's like sort of the simple math would do the trick. So there is some of that, because we actually do a bunch of testing too with some of the high power chargers, and even with like the Hummer that's on an 800-volt system, it's a huge battery pack, is capable of charging at 350 kilowatts, charges for 350 kilowatts for like 5 minutes, 10 minutes before it ramps down significantly and comes back down around 150 to prevent overheating of the battery. All right, we got something in the chat too. Law enforcement last, higher fuel use vehicles have better payback typically though. Yeah, I mean, we've seen a lot of people pushing law enforcement last. Actually, if you're interested, if you've got a law enforcement fleet, the Department of Homeland Security has a huge law enforcement fleet, and they've been testing out a bunch of vehicles there. So might be some interesting lessons learned you could share.
I ordered 3 electric squad cars.
Love it. So also, it looks like you can hit up Ken and get some information on how those are done. All right, let's move on to, I think we've got one more slide, and then we're going to open it up for general questions. So this is just what sort of fleet assistance NREL can provide, either through the EECS program or otherwise. We've got web resources. I mentioned a lot of that, a lot of direct assistance. Got experts in all sorts of areas, vehicle grid integration, charging, fleet planning, public, workplace charging, do a bunch of training. We also help with data reporting. I didn't talk about that too much, and have developed a number of different guidance documents as well. Again, I've mostly been involved in the ones for the federal fleet. However, there are other documents out there for state, local, public charging. We run a few different working groups. So if you're interested in participating and sharing different ideas, reach out to me, and I'll see if I can put you in touch with the right people. Of course, some fleet and EV support. And cybersecurity does come up as an issue. Actually, we have a whole cybersecurity and resilience center. Work closely with actually one of my colleagues who used to be in our mobility center, is now over there. So he's got the background with regards to vehicle grid integration, EVs, all that sort of stuff. It's just working more on the security side of things now. So that's it for me. I appreciate everybody's time and everyone participating in the polls, especially guys willing to chime in and volunteer there on that case study exercise. So please let me know if you have any questions. Happy to answer them.
So I wasn't able to, this is Robin again. I wasn't able to really jump in with the question about planning the charging infrastructure. So with the big county, we have like dozens, we have lots and lots of buildings across a lot of different departments. So that's definitely something we're trying to figure out how best to do planning. Do you know if there's Is it more common now for there to be consultants or companies that are able to help the EV transition planning with that size? And is there, utilizing these tools that you had talked about today, even like the EV locate one that's not quite out yet, would you recommend trying out those first, or seeing what other kind of companies and things are out there to work with?
Yeah, I mean, sort of depends, I suppose. You know, one question is whether you have the money for the consultants, in which case, yes, there are people that can help you out. We're actually encouraging the consultants to use these tools and just to leverage them as part of their work.
Yes, that makes sense. So even if we were to experiment with utilizing these, it might be a similar
right.
platform.
Yeah.
Okay, I appreciate that.
Yeah, because I mean, a lot of them are going through the same process, but varying degrees of sophistication. It's not always easy to tell when you're talking to a consultant what you know, what they've done and what all, you know, sort of how that compares to industry. So been trying to develop some more like kind of like industry standard tools and practices. So that's a great option. I mean, a lot of times different organizations are going to have people on staff who are pretty savvy about these issues, and in a case like that, they'll be able to kind of run their own analysis. But it's often a question of, you know, whether it's labor, time, or money to outsource. Right. Any other questions, guys? Well, Julia, I think I'll kick it back to you then.
Oh, Ken, did you have another question?
I didn't have a question. I'd say thank you for the presentation, Cable. It was awesome.
You're welcome. Yeah, thanks for your participation. I really appreciate it.